and welcome back to my channel. So today we finally get to talk about Along the River of Flesh. This is the sequel to Gone to See the Riverman. I am so thrilled to have this, to have been given an ARC of this. It was a surprise ARC. Kristopher Triana did send this to me. I had no idea that was happening. He literally announced that a sequel was coming out, and then the next day this was in my mailbox. And I had to read it. I'm just so blown away by Gone to See the Riverman still. For those of you guys who have not heard of this novel before, Gone to See the Riverman was one of my top reads, I believe, of 2021. And it was a book that was marketed to me as like one of the most disturbing books you'll ever read, but also one of those books that was just so good that everybody was reading it, even people who weren't into extreme horror. And so I had read a novella by Kristopher Triana called A Cold Place for Dying earlier from Nightworms, and it didn't feel that extreme to me, but I liked the writing and I liked the tone, so I was like, you know what, let me give this book a chance. It seems kind of short. I think it's about 200 pages. And if it gets to a point where like I have to stop, I'll stop, and if I don't like it, I know not to read anything else from this author. I will say, before I continue talking, this review will not contain any spoilers to Along the River of Flesh, but it will contain some spoilers to Gone to See the Riverman, just so I can fully talk about Along the River of Flesh from the mindset that I would need to. But when I read Gone to See the Riverman, I was just absolutely captivated by the writing style. I was just captivated by Triana's tone. For those of you who have read the novel, you know that there is a massive moment in the middle of the book where all of a sudden one of the main characters who you are rooting for from the very beginning, all of a sudden you're like, screw you. Like, I have never gone from really like liking and sympathizing with a character before to just absolutely hating them in the course of like a page. And it was brilliant, and it was a total blindside, and it's what made the book so compelling, the way that Kristopher Triana can really play with your emotions. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He was making you really like this character just to all of a sudden take that away from you with like the most shocking thing. And Gone to See the Riverman, along with Along the River of Flesh, both have very disturbing scenes, very disturbing characters, trigger warnings everywhere from like all directions. But what I like about Kristopher Triana is he's very tasteful with his extreme horror. Nothing is ever gratuitous, nothing is ever fully depicted. And when I say that, I mean the things I don't want to read about. I really don't like reading about like assaults on women, and in this case assaults on children. And I feel like that is something that does happen in both books, but again is never depicted. It is more alluded at, or you kind of get this like the moment begins and it like fades to black at the close of a chapter. So everything that you're led to believe, all of the really gratuitous and graphic stuff would be in your own head. He's not putting it to page, but he's letting you know what happens. And I think that's a great way to talk about very extreme topics, but not get so engrossed in those extremities that it becomes unpalatable for the reader. And I really like the balance of that, because I feel like if Kristopher Triana really did dive into some of the scenes that he writes, I wouldn't be able to read his stuff. I will say Along the River of Flesh, I feel like pushes the boundaries a little bit more than Gone to See the Riverman. And it doesn't have that blindsiding quality that Gone to See the Riverman has. And I think that was a very smart move on Triana's part, because after being blindsided, I knew going into this that we might have that happen again, and I thought it was very smart the way Kristopher Triana kind of unraveled our characters. It was kind of hinted at who was good and who was evil from the beginning, just by the way that they speak to people. There's a great scene in this novel where a character you're kind of led to believe is like potentially a good dude, but just with like a tragic history. And he talks so rudely to a waitress. And if you guys have been on my channel for a while, you know I work in the service industry, and I think respecting servers and bartenders and barbacks and people who work in hospitality, it's like a core value of who I am. And when I read that, I was like, oh my god. I was like, this guy's an asshole. Like, this guy sucks. And that was like the very beginning, I noticed, of Triana like unraveling that character and revealing who that character truly was. And I just loved the way that he had two different interactions with, multiple actual interactions with service industry people from various different characters. And it was just this one instance where this guy was so rude compared to the other character that they're comparing, like, narratives to. That guy was just kind of pushy. But this guy was rude, and I was like, oh, no, you are not a good person. And then, of course, everything kind of unravels. But I loved that. And I loved how in this one, you really do get glimpses of who characters are through their actions. And it's kind of this slow gradation of unraveling versus with Gone to See the Riverman, where your main character all of a sudden does a full 180. And I did love how in this story we do have three main characters. So I am blabbering on and on and on, and I haven't even read the back of the book for y'all. So it says, having escaped from prison, serial killer Edmund Cox returns to his hometown of Killen, entering the woods with his darlings in his pocket. He begins a new quest along the Hollow River, hoping to make good on one final deal with the Riverman. What Edmund doesn't realize is he's not going alone. Keith Drakeson is one of the police detectives who hunted Cox the first time around, and he considers the killer's escape an insult to his legacy. Determined to capture the killer again, he follows a hunch that leads him to where Edmund grew up. Gary Chapman is a private investigator looking for a missing girl named Jessica Hong, who he believes was one of Edmund Cox's victims. Jessica was writing a paper on the legend of the Riverman before she disappeared. Oh, am I going to be able to read this? Okay, sorry. This is like the ARC. It's this little wraparound thing, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to read one of these sentences. And it says, Gary and Keith decide to team up, but they soon... They soon meet up with this girl named June, is basically what it's saying, who's a runaway who has come to Killen with a backpack full of articles on Edmund Cox. She too has come to these woods in search of the killer. And the three travelers head upriver, each carrying their own dark secrets, as they pursue a man of pure evil the local legend, some say, is behind it all. Okay, so let's just break this down. I love that our main book takes place primarily through the perspective of Laurie. You get a little bit of Abby and kind of their whole backstories, upbringing, and why they are where they are. This story, however, you get insight into Edmund, which you really didn't get at all in the first book, and he's so scary. And then you follow our detective, Keith, our PI, Gary, and then this runaway teenage girl, June, who like may or may not be an Edmund Cox groupie. And I loved having the four different perspectives, especially because they're all traveling the same path that Laurie did in the first book. And I just love this setting. I think Killen and the Hollow River are so beautiful. They are so dark. They are so weird. I see everything in like an orange fall light, probably because of the cover. But I think having four main characters in this novel really balanced the book out, especially because you get a lot of gray characters, some really good characters, some really evil characters, and I really like watching how the river affects all of them. Another thing that I really, really loved is how politically current this book is without feeling like that. I know that I mentioned this when I read A Clown in a Cornfield 2, and how I felt that a lot of Adam Cesare's like stances on political topics were really kind of shoved down your throat in that novel, and it just felt very abrasive, and it didn't feel like a horror novel or a slasher. It just felt like propaganda. This book talks about a lot of really, really relevant, really, really depressing current events and problems in America, and the way that Triana does it is just so tasteful. Unfortunately, it does talk about events like Columbine, and the way Triana does it, it was through the perspective of like surviving family members, And I thought that was so well done to not just say, oh, this is bad. We know it's bad. When we read horror novels, at least for me, I'm not reading to be reminded of things that are so awful in the real world. I'm reading to get different perspectives on things and escape like the horrors of reality. And I think by writing it through the perspective of somebody who went through that experience adjacently and now is still surviving and still has to, you know, carry on, was so scary and such a cool and unique angle. And I just thought it was so well done. And I'm not going to say who that character is because you're going to have to read this book and find out. But I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I really loved how Triana introduced a lot of other political commentaries in just a very subtle, not so in your face way, where the focus was on the aftermath of those events, and the corruption and failure of the justice system in certain events. And I thought it was so brilliant to just see the other side that isn't always shown in the media, but the things that linger with you afterwards. And that's something that Kristopher Triana does very well. He's very good at writing stories and scenes and characters that linger with the reader afterwards. I would have loved to have read this book in a day, but I would get to a scene and it was so heavy and so dark and so depraved that I would put the book down. It never stopped me from picking it up the next day, which is how I know that I really liked this, because that's how I read it, and that's how I read the original, Gone to See the Riverman. This was a 4-star read from me. Unfortunately, there was no way this was going to get a 5-star read from me because the topics in it, I just can't give something with some of the depraved topics that are in this book. I can't give those books 5 stars. I talk about this all the time on my channel, but Gone to See the Riverman objectively is a 5-star read. Let the Right One In objectively is a 5-star read. My personal rating, because of my comfort level, puts that at a 4-star, and that's how I felt about this. Though I would say that this more leans in the 4-star objective range, whereas Gone to See the Riverman is more of the 5-star. I do think Gone to See the Riverman is better just because it was so unique and took me on such a journey. But I absolutely adored being back on the river. I loved, again, the atmosphere. I love reading about the Riverman. And I loved that this book really dove into the folklore of the Riverman, which is something that the previous book did not. And he's such a cool and creepy and almost ethereal-like character, and I don't know if he's good or evil, and I love that. I love this character. He's this weird cosmic thing, and his realm is both disturbing and horrifying and oddly macabrely beautiful, and I just love it. And I loved how Triana paired blues with the Riverman and that whole folklore. I loved the whole concept of Jessica Hong writing the story on the Riverman. And then you get the big reveal with her, which I think I kind of predicted, but you have to read and find out. But I adored this. One thing I've determined is that, you know, I was thinking when I was reading this if I would want to read a 3rd book, because you know how I feel about series. And I was like, I don't think I would want to read anything more after where the events of this novel end. I think I'm okay with that. But I was like, I could be interested in a prequel with Edmund Cox when he first meets the Riverman. But I don't necessarily believe Edmund Cox is a strong enough character to have an entire novel about. He's very much a one-note serial killer. But I was like, you know who I want to read about? The Deacon. Because the Deacon has now, he's a deacon, right? Deacon, he is a deacon. Ha, I found it. Deacon Jones. I would love to read a novel on Deacon Jones. Especially because he just kind of wanders in and out of both books, and he's so unique, and he's so creepy, and he's so bizarre. That would be so cool. So, Triana, if you're watching this, that would be awesome. But I would love to just continue to read more and more in this setting. Primarily this setting. And I loved, again, the idea of taking minor characters from the first book, introducing a bunch of new characters, and keeping the setting and the Riverman as our main character. I think the river is truly the main character of this series. And I loved it. I loved it. And my really only big criticism of this whole book is one, well, there's 2 big criticisms that I have, and they're really not that bad. Like, the first one is, because I'm already introduced to this world, I didn't have that like Disneyland moment of like going into the Riverman's realm for the first time that I think I had with the first book, and how the twists and turns really blindsided me. I was like prepared for them this time. And then the second one is I found the very, very last scene of the novel to be just a little too gratuitous for my liking. I felt like that scene didn't need to happen. To me, it felt very much like the scene with all of the kids in the sewers in It, if you know what I'm talking about. It just felt a little grotesque and unnecessary, and it was the only moment where something extreme happened where I was really like, I feel like this is pushing the boundaries because it's the end of the book, so it doesn't quite push the narrative along the way that some of the other more depraved things that happen in this book do. I understand why it happened, to kind of show the depravity and mental unstableness of the characters involved. However, I don't think it was necessary, and it was something I didn't feel comfortable reading. But that was really it. Like, I was so on board with everything until that like last scene, and it took me off guard. I thought it was really gross. So like, for the shock value and for people who love extreme horror, you're definitely gonna like this. But this was a 4-star read. I definitely think Gone to See the Riverman is superior. But this was such a journey, and I really, really enjoyed this so much. I don't know if I liked this more than Prettiest Girl in the Grave. They were both so fun, but they were both so different. I feel like The Prettiest Girl in the Grave you can just read at like Halloween time and just like have fun with this. This you have to be like mentally prepared for. Like, this was mentally challenging to read because you had to digest so many crazy scenes and just cosmic entities and horrible things about the world, and it was just brilliantly done, and I can't wait to see what else Kristopher Triana has. I know he has another book coming out later in the year. I will be reading that, and he was gracious enough to send me 2 more of his books, including Full Brutal, which I will be reading very, very soon. I might need a bit of a palate cleanser in between this and that, though. But yeah, 4-star read. If you've never read Gone to See the Riverman, I highly, 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 highly recommend that. And if you enjoy that book, definitely check this out. The Riverman and the Hollow River and Killen, it's such a brilliant setting. It's so Southern Gothic, and I just adore it. And I love, and I'm so thankful that he chose to bring us back to that setting. He could have done a lot of different things with a sequel, but keeping it on that main setting, I think, really is just the highlight of this novel. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. Just definitely go and check this out if you guys are extreme horror fans, or somebody who's like interested in the idea of extreme horror but you're not sure if you can commit. I think Triana's pretty good with balancing. Like, I think he's pretty good with balancing the extreme with very good storytelling, very good character development, beautiful settings, and there's a lot of really, really interesting horror in here that's both supernatural as well as something that could happen in reality, which I think is the best way to do supernatural horror, because at the end of the day, real people are the scariest things, not the ghosts that can get you in the middle of the night. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post on this channel every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Mwah.